Welcome to Traveling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. Hi, I'm Gary Byers. This is Dr. Steve Collins, our resident rock star, and we're sitting here in the midst of 10,000 pottery sherds.
Yeah, and walls full of bins that are full of pottery sherds.
From all of them
Tens of
coming
thousands.
from the site of el-Hammam in Jordan, just north of the Dead Sea, just east of the Jordan River. And we're going back in January, and it's going to be a great time. But let's just talk a little bit about what's happened since we last dug there before COVID days.
It has been almost 3 years. I mean, we lost 2 seasons from COVID. We lost 2021 and we lost 2022, which would have been earlier this year because we always dig in the wintertime. And people ask, why do you dig in the wintertime? Well, because the dig site is 500 feet below sea level and it's subtropical almost. And so you can't really dig there by the time you get to the spring, it's over 100 degrees every day. And so we need to get our work done before it gets too hot.
Yep. So we'll be there January, February, and leave middle of March probably, and that'll be good enough, we think. So a lot has happened in the last almost 3 years in relation to the site. And of course, we had these last few years, and we've been working with all our material. We've got all kinds of testing done on organic material to tell us dates for things that we wanted to know about.
Human bones and animal bones.
Getting that worked on. And so we've had a lot of stuff going on, but one of the big issues was, one of the big things was this article that came out about an airburst over Tal el-Hammam, 1650, 1700 BC, and that really spoke to a lot of people in different ways, but definitely spoke to a lot of people, a lot of reaction to that. And why don't you review a little bit of that, where we are with all of that stuff. Some folks maybe really still haven't heard about it. Others have heard something about it. Talk to us about this a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting issue because way back when, I'd say more than 20 years ago, when John Moore and I started working. John Moore is one of our historical geographers that we work with, and John had been looking at, and I had been looking at the Sodom narratives, particularly Genesis 19, of course, Genesis 13 for the location of Sodom, which Tal el-Hammam fits perfectly, and then he brought up the idea that there was some language in Genesis 19 around verse 28 that sounded remarkably like a meteoritic or bolide airburst event. And of course, back then, I hadn't really thought about that at all because I think I even asked him, well, explain that to me because I don't exactly know what that is.
I didn't know.
And the first thing he said was, you know.
You know.
Well, I don't. Don't you hate it when people say, you know?
You know.
It's like Tunguska, Siberia, 1908. And I said, okay, educate me. And so he shot me a bunch of articles from Science and different journals, and I read up on Tunguska. Well, when I had been finally educated about Tunguska, I understood what he was talking about, and the whole concept is that there are, from time to time, objects that come flying in to the solar system and or let's say the Earth gets in their way of their orbit, and they come flying into the Earth's atmosphere, burn up. Now, this is all based on mass, velocity, and trajectory, and of course, also you could say the material side of things. What's it actually made out of? Yeah. So is it an ice ball, piece of a comet? Is it a stony asteroid? Is it a metallic meteorite? So anyway, it could be a number of things. So depending upon all those factors, if it's just the right size, at just the right velocity, and has just the right everything, if everything comes together, perfect storm, that object will explode as it comes through the atmosphere. It will heat up. It will reach critical mass. It'll go from solid, liquid, to gas, to plasma, and it will literally explode. Most or all of it will become a sort of a plasmic, superheated mass and impact on the surface, not leaving a crater, but just simply, let's say, toasting rather severely everything on the ground. Now, what happened in Tunguska, Siberia in 1908 was one of these bolide objects came through the atmosphere, burned up, exploded, and impacted upon the Siberian forest, downed and scorched about 2,500 square kilometers of trees in an instant. Now, there was nobody there. I mean, there's some tribes living around the area, but I think nobody died that we know of. But, for example, if that had impacted on the city of Moscow, or if that had impacted on New York or Los Angeles, it would have, that size of an object and cosmic explosion would have completely obliterated any of the biggest cities on the face of the earth. So I suppose you might say we're just kind of lucky that it didn't hit somewhere else. And so, of course, things like that spawn movies, right? I mean, there have been lots of movies about impact events like that. But there was also one, people can look this up, in Chelyabinsk, Russia in 2013, in February 2013. And that event, it was pretty high. It was about 10 or 12 miles up. It exploded. Now, it broke a lot of windows on the ground. A few people got, like second-degree sunburn type things, but nobody died. But what if it had exploded only a mile above the surface? Lots of people would have died because it was over a populated area.
And it's not so much from fragments that are going to hit people and kill them, but this plasma.
It's superheated. We're talking about 20, 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit for a flash. But that flash is just enough to vaporize bodies, to completely incinerate everything. Now, of course, the United States government is always interested in studying NASA, in studying that sort of stuff. And so we became kind of interested in it too because of Genesis 19. And in Genesis 19, John pointed out to me that this description seemed like what you might call a phenomenological description of an airburst event written by an ancient person who actually witnessed it. And what it says is, at the moment of destruction, it says, there came goprit and fire. Goprit, sometimes translated brimstone, but really it's more fundamental than that. It's like burning stone. Super hot burning stone. Of course, the only stone they knew that would burn was sulfur. You light it and burn with a nice blue flame. We used to do that when we were kids in our chemistry sets, you remember?
Yep.
And but goprit can also be translated as lightning. It is translated in the Old Testament a couple times as lightning. So it has a pretty broad linguistic base to it. And so it basically means burning stone. So burning stone and fire from Yahweh out of the heavens. And that's a very, very clear, concise way to describe a cosmic, a meteoritic object coming into the atmosphere and explode. It's coming out of the sky. It's not coming out of the ground. It's not a terrestrial event. It's not an earthquake. It's not gas belching out of the ground and setting on fire, anything like that, which, by the way, has never happened in the history of the world. Nobody's ever seen that. People have suggested that about the destruction of Sodom, but nobody's ever witnessed that. Nobody's even knows that even happens. But this does. These kinds of events happen rather frequently over the history of the planet. I'm not saying they happen every day or every week, but these big explosive bolide events do happen periodically, maybe every few years. Some of them happen at different parts of the planet. You see it on the news or you see it in scientific articles. They don't do any damage, happen over the ocean or they happen out in the middle of nowhere, but they do happen.
Yep.
And so it looks very much like this explosion that destroyed the cities of the plain was actually some kind of a bolide airburst, a cosmic event, which the Bible describes as a cosmic event.
So the Genesis text, we believe, was written by Moses. So he's the one that writes this down however he got his information, and he dates it to the times of Abraham.
Yes.
That's when this thing happens. And that has become, based on what the scientists saw in their research, 21 scientists did this article about the airburst over el-Hammam, and their data suggested they're putting this thing about 1650, 1700 BC. That date didn't make you flinch, move, probably made you smile when they said that date.
Yeah. And we do have good solid dates on the destruction. We have lots and lots of radiocarbon dates on the destruction. And that event happened right at that. It was the terminal moment. The city at el-Hammam had lasted for several thousand years, really without a break. And all of a sudden, it is not just el-Hammam, but all the cities around it seem to have gone offline. 400 square kilometers of what had been well-watered plain and agricultural lands went offline, and nobody lived in that area. There were no settlements across that region for the next 7 centuries, which is pretty remarkable given that the water didn't go away. And the defensible high ground you need to build an ancient city didn't go away. Mm-hmm. But what did go away was, well, the original population went away, but then the destruction of the agricultural lands. Yeah. These sorts of temperatures would literally sterilize the soil, if not explode the soil off the bedrock altogether. And so it took 700 years for that area to replenish itself as far as the soil is concerned, so that at least barley could be grown in the region. So
that date, 1700 BC, something like that they came up with based on their research, but that also their research corresponded with our research on those dates.
Yeah, I mean, both sides, came to the middle. We all knew, we knew by the ceramics and a lot of radiocarbon dates what the date of the destruction was. They did some of that on their own, and so we have it going both ways. We have a good solid date. We say 1700 plus minus 50.
That works with radiometric dating,
right?
The way to do that range. So that, though, caused a lot of consternation for a lot of folks that know the Bible, love the Bible, believe the Bible. That they bought that date for them was just way too late.
Yeah, and of course the only reason why anybody would reject the identification of el-Hammam as Sodom, because it is in the right place. I mean, biblically, it's exactly in the right place. We think it's in the right time frame, and it has all the goods to be that. But there are some who reject the dating, and they reject the dating because they have a concept that the Genesis lifespan numbers are somehow base 10 arithmetic values that can be added up to give a chronology not only for Abraham but the flood and the beginning of the world. And that whole thing plays out over about a 4,000 year period, and goes back to about 4,000 BC. The problem with that is there are many, and it may take us about 3 episodes to talk through this, but the problem with that is that it doesn't square with what we know of ancient history and what we know of ancient writers and how they actually conceived of numbers. And so in short, the numbers in the book of Genesis are symbolic or honorific formulas. This is a truly Mesopotamian way to operate. This is the way the Mesopotamians did it. This is the way the ancient world thought. Nobody ever in antiquity had any concept that could cause them to, for example, come up with a chronology, to come up with an event chronology or people chronology. They never even thought like that. The first chronology about the Bible even, or the world or anything like that, didn't come around until the Hellenistic period around the 3rd century BC. So after 300 BC, yes, you get Greeks mainly thinking about how to put events together, how to come up with chronologies and sequences of ancient events. But before that, nobody did that. There was no absolute calendar like 1800 BC. There was only, in the reign, in the 3rd year, the 5th year, the 18th year of the reign of King so and so or King so and so. This is called regnal dating. They would make everything relative to kings. They had no concept of a larger picture of chronology, and so not only did the early Mesopotamians have these exaggerated lifespans in Mesopotamia on the order of tens of thousands of years, exaggerated reigns or exaggerated lifespans, but this was a way to symbolically honor the ancestors. You symbolically honor the ancestors by exaggerating or hyperbolically inflating their ages. Now, let me say this. Nobody in antiquity thought that those were real numbers. They knew how to do some math. They knew how to deal with it. But nobody thought those were real numbers. Nobody thought that, for example, kings in Sumeria could rule for 36,000 years. They looked at that. They knew how old their grandfather was. I mean, they kind of knew how, people died between 30 and 40 years old, maybe 50. And so they knew what all that was about. So the Bible writers are no different. And of course, Abraham and Isaac, these guys are Mesopotamians. They're coming out of that Mesopotamian world. They use a base 60 system. And so there are many things about these numbers that we can talk about maybe over the next couple of episodes. So people ought to stay tuned so we can kind of explain how do ancient people look at numbers, and then how can we use science to actually nail the time frame of Abraham.
All right, so this has been a good way to end this episode so you can get somebody to tune in for the next one. That was really smart.
Yeah, we're going to leave it hanging. We're going to leave it hanging.
So this is a really important issue, and a lot of folks, good people who love the Bible, are wrestling with this kind of stuff, and so this is really important to listen to, think through, and make some decisions and choices. So we're talking about archaeology, and right now we're talking about numbers and dates and years. So you join us next time, whenever that is, and we're going to finish talking about numbers. This is because this is biblical archaeology for the 21st century. We know a lot more stuff than we used to know, and we'd be glad to tell you about it. Join us again soon.